So my name is Jen Florian, and I am an ASL major here at Clemson. I'm a senior, and do you see our interpreter over here? Her name is Tori, and we also have another interpreter named Paige. They are the interpreters for the presentation. So if the interpreters need any help, please make sure that you let me know, and I'll be sure to slow down. Let's leave the door open for another 5 minutes so that people can continue to come in if they're a little bit late. Okay, let's go ahead and start the presentation. So 200 years is when ASL first began, and it really impacted deaf education. After this presentation, you'll really see that ASL has impacted deaf education and changed it along the way. So American Sign Language started out of FSL. Really, it's LSF. So when we look back to that time period, this was the man that we're going to be talking about. I don't really know how to say his name in French, but his name is Abbé, and this is his sign name right here. He was a priest. He was the father of American Sign Language, really, is what happened. So there was one night where there was a man, Gallaudet, who was knocking on a door, and no one answered, and he decided to go in, and he sees two women sitting there. And he looks at them like, really? You didn't answer the door when I knocked? Another person came in and said, no, they're deaf, so they didn't hear you. Gallaudet was fascinated by this. I'm sorry, Abbé de la Paix. He was fascinated by their communication. So he saw them signing. I don't know if it's a true story or not, but he really was a real teacher of deaf students near his home. He taught them in his home, and he traveled to Spain. He wanted to learn about finger spelling. He started to communicate with monks and started to read this. You can read this on your own too if you want. My teacher ended up giving it to me today, but I didn't have time to read it before this presentation. I will read it later, but I just didn't have time to read it today. So they took finger spelling, and he created Manual French Sign Language. And he started to teach his deaf students to read and to write using this system. And it was reading and writing in formal French. So he was called the father of sign language. He didn't really make it up, but education-wise, he really was the first one to facilitate this. So as we continue on, he was teaching at his home, and it started to really grow. And he established the first school. He opened the doors, and it was in Paris, France. And you see the name right here below this picture. It's another French name. Again, it was in Paris, France. There's still a plaque up on the wall at the deaf school in France. And French really was important in impacting deaf education. So how did that impact ASL? So let's talk about another story of Thomas Gallaudet. So there's Alice and there's Gallaudet. So next door to Gallaudet, he saw a little girl. Her name was Alice. She was just trying to write in the sand. She was trying to copy her ABCs, the alphabet. And he realized, wow, she's not stupid. She can pick up language. She's able. The belief at the time was that that deaf people were stupid and that they weren't able to learn. But he finally understood, and he saw this through this experience, that they are able to learn. So Alice's father gave money to Gallaudet to go to England and France to learn so that he could come back and teach Alice whatever form he learned that was best. So, after the war happened, it was a challenge for the connections of different countries. So he went to England and he was, observing different areas. Alice's father, Cogswell, he was trying to understand what was going on, but Gallaudet was meeting new people, and he saw one specific teacher. He was a French teacher in England doing a presentation on communication. And Gallaudet saw this, and he was fascinated by the skill of this teacher. So he finished at England and ended up going to France to study more about this. And he asked for more help in going back to America to learn this. So he started to learn more about this so that he could teach Alice. He learned manually coded French. And he ended up meeting a man named Clark, and he asked Clark to come back with him to America. And so Clark and Gallaudet ended up coming back to America and establishing the first school for the deaf, called ASD. And it was in Hartford, Connecticut. It used to be termed stupid or dumb, but that's not a term that we use anymore. So it's important because this was 200 years ago that this was established. 200 years this year in 1817. It was the first deaf school where ASL began to blossom and began. So we're trying to celebrate that 200 years today and this week and even this year. It's really wonderful.